This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, brought to you by the Israel Democracy Institute, an independent center for research and action dedicated to strengthening the foundations of Israeli democracy. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern, and before we start, I have a small request. If you like us, please show it. We need your support. Please give to our show by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and you'll see a big red button that says Patreon. Click on it and support us. We're counting on you. Today's conversation is part of a series we're dedicating to the 2019 general elections. My guests are two research fellows affiliated with the Israel Democracy Institute, specializing in the threats posed to democracy by cyber attacks and online intervention by foreign powers. Eli Bahar is a lawyer, former legal advisor to Shin Bet. He's a lecturer at the Tel Aviv University Faculty of Law and a researcher at Israel Democracy Institute's Amnon Lipkin-Shahak program on national security and democracy. Ron Shamir is a cyber expert, the former head of the technology division at Shin Bet, and a researcher at the Federman Cybersecurity Center at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Hello to you both.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
So, Ron, let's start with you. How likely is a large-scale cyber attack ahead of the April 9th election day?
I think it's very likely because as we've seen all over the world, we saw attacks like that. But we must understand that sometimes it's not heroic as we think it might be. And even a small intervention in the election campaign here in Israel is a cyber attack. And if the attacker achieves his goal, and we're not sure what it is, maybe to influence about the results of the elections, maybe just to confuse us, just to weakness our democracy, and if he achieves that goal, it's a cyber attack. So I think it's most likely.
So anything that comes from outside and somehow interferes in the democratic process is a cyber attack. It's not, as you say, it's not just this, large-scale kind of...
Yeah, I would add to that it's something that comes from the cyberspace. Okay, so if it's a physical action, we might not call it a cyber attack, but everything that comes from what we define as cyber, computers and the networks that connects them, is a cyber attack, and we took a broad approach to that.
So it includes dissemination of fake news on social media, not just an attack meant to, say, undermine or destabilize the infrastructure.
Yeah. While conducting the research, we understood that this is a major threat. So we should look at what happens in the social media as a general, includes all kinds of media. And when someone is doing an attack, a comprehensive attack, a huge attack, like, for example, Russia, when they're doing a big attack, they use all the tools. And also social media, spreading fake news through social media, other kinds of media, even ads in newspapers, along the roads, whatever.
Eli, is Israel in a category apart from other countries that have sustained such intervention? I mean, because of its, say, somewhat volatile security situation?
I would say that there are a few dimensions here. One of them, the first of it is that Israel is a very polarized community, a society, which helps an attacker to look at these divisions and try to push that forward and to see how to broaden it and how to weaken the society. So this is one dimension. The other dimension is that Israel is a very technological society, which on the one hand gives opportunities to attack, and on the other hand, Israel has a robust system which for years is preparing for such an attacks. But there are new things here that we should address, and this is the part of our research.
So what is really the status of cybersecurity in Israel? How respondent are the authorities to such threats that Ron just said is very likely?
So on the one hand, the first thing is when once mentioned is the process itself. When people go to the ballot and just vote for their candidates, this is relatively has a good security level posed by the Central Committee and the Shin Bet and the new directorate for cyber defense. But the other dimensions are less protected. The second one is protecting political figures and political parties, which are not very protected in Israel. And the third one, as you mentioned, is the media and the social media, which it's difficult even to understand how to defend the country against such fake news, deep fake, and all the other buzzwords that we use in these terms. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a bit about this new Directorate for Cyber Defense and the legal landscape that is meant to address this question. I mean, I'm assuming that only very recently the Israeli legal code had really no recourse for such things.
Well, the new directorate, it's not very new, but it's relatively new, and it's in a way, it's in the changing mode, still changing mode. At the beginning, the Shin Bet had the legal duty to secure the critical infrastructures, we said. And this was since 2002, I think, until recently. And then 3 years ago, the government got two decisions that reshaped this new directorate and gave them the responsibility to protect the Israeli cybersecurity arena in a broader content, meaning to be the civilized protector of cyberspace regarding the economical, not only the security level, but also economical and other things that they are in charge of. But yes, they don't have a law still, and it's still under debate.
And your recommendation in your paper is that it should be done. There are some legal provisions that should be adopted.
Yes, of course, because we think that this is not something that you have to do it voluntarily. We have to put it, it's serious enough to draw the borders between the Israeli Security Agency, the Shin Bet, and this new directorate. The directorate is less in security kind of position, and it's more appropriate that this kind of organization would be in charge of the first line protecting the Israeli democracy from cyber attacks vis-a-vis the election process. Yes.
Ron, it's the fact that the Israeli voting in the general election is very low tech. I mean, you actually use paper ballots and you put them in envelopes and they are counted manually. Does this help at all, or as you say, it's just one dimension in the risk that is at the end of the day not a very big one?
I think it's very important that we still use the old legacy way, and I'll give you one example. In the last election, Eli Shai thought that the election wasn't fair, that in some voting points the counting wasn't fair.
So just to say to our listeners that he is a far-right leader, Haredi leader, who was the head of a party that didn't cross the electoral threshold by a mere hundreds of thousands of votes.
Right, exactly. So because we were still voting with paper ballots, the Central Election Committee was able to allow him to recount, actually go to the warehouse where they store all the boxes, recount all the paper ballot and see that it was fair. It was counted fairly. So this is much more difficult to convince you that it was fair if it's a computer system, because trust is a major issue in democracy and in election at all. So you want people to have the trust that the winning part is easier. His trust in the election is easier than the loser. And you must have the loser also trust in the process. So I believe that it's okay, and it's even good that we still vote with paper ballots. I know that in several countries around the world, they thought about moving to a computerized system, and they went back from that, back to the old good paper ballots. So although all kind of people I hear on the media and all kind of places that they say that they wonder how come that Israel is such a high-tech country still voting with paper ballots, I think it's a good idea. And one of the recommendations that we wrote in our paper is that we should stay with that. Even in the primaries election in Israel, some parties are doing it with paper ballots, some parties are using computer system. We think it's not a very good idea. And especially about parties, especially because they have poor level of security, we think using paper ballot, it's much better. If for any reason, one day they'll decide to move to computerized system, they should have, other than the very good security, they should have a very good backup system and a very good audit system. Because if Eli Shai or someone else want to realize whether the election were fair or not, he must have the ability to do that. And it's not that simple when you have a computerized system.
As you said, the main threat is really to the trust in the system, which is really what the entire democratic system relies on. But the attempts to undermine this trust are not new and certainly not specific to the age of, the cyber sphere. I mean, Soviet propaganda tried and succeeded in doing that in the West, in Western Europe, in America also to an extent, for a very long time. Are we seeing just, a new incarnation of the same kind of propaganda, or is it something that is inherently new in your view?
So this is a major concern in our paper, and you're totally right. I mean, the influence, trying to influence your neighbor's democracy isn't new. As you said, we know that for decades. The problem is that in our time, it's much easier. So the tools that the attacker or the influencer has under his hands are better and broader. So we talked about social media. You can influence people who use social media by retweeting even fake news. We read a paper done by a Rand Institute. They said that fake news is more convincing than real news on social media. So
convincing in what way?
People believe it.
Oh, okay. And retweet it and share it. Right.
You just have to have an army of bots, also something that is relatively new, that keep retweeting these fake news, and people start to believe that this is the truth. Okay.
So the problem is not the bots or the foreign power that employs them, but people who believe them. I mean, the effort should be more than, in the realm of security or even the legal provisions. It should be mainly education.
I totally agree with that. We need to be more educated, and we need to, the level of awareness, especially near the time of the election, we need to be aware of what are the tools that the other side has. But still, social media, Facebook, Google, whatever, they must be also accountable for allowing, for example, the use by fake accounts, bots, trolls, and they must also do the effort to eliminate that. So everybody should join the combat against foreign influence on the election. Another very important thing is time. If you did an influence operation in the 50s, the time frame of those days, today everything is so quick. Everything moves so fast on the internet. So even if I, as a government, realize that I'm under attack, the time that I had to respond till the election is very short. You see that Robert Mueller in the United States, just now, more than 2 years after the election, starts to give us the report about what really happened then. So Mr. Trump will end his president before we really understand, did the Russian influence the election in the United States or not, right? So this is a very important thing to look for.
Yeah. Eli, going back to the legal aspect of it, and actually the Mueller report is a good pretext to bring one of the things that I learned from reading your paper is that collusion is not a criminal offense in Israel.
Well, it's not. The criminal code in Israel is very broad, and you can find something that can be related to this kind of activity. But I think that it's important, even for the declaration mode, that you have to specify that collusion with a foreign entity in order to influence your elections should be a criminal offense and should be treated like this and without any interpretations, so to speak.
And what are the other legal steps that should be taken in Israel to address that? One of the things that you say that the authority of the Central Election Committee should be beefed up.
Yes, I think that this Central Committee has a constitutional role in Israel, and it should get first the authority, and second the institutional capabilities in order to fulfill it. Why? Because when it comes to elections, the Israeli Security Agency and its directorate are all they are under the direction of the prime minister, which doesn't matter who is the prime minister. It's always a political player. And you don't want that these kind of things would be under the direct or indirect influence of a political player when he could be one of the people that we suspect that want to influence the elections. So we want them in this certain period before the elections to have a constitutional role and the capability.
Because right now they're not a statutory body, right? It's just an election.
No. They have a statutory body, but I think that you have to enhance their capabilities, their legal status, and their organizational. For example, one of our recommendations is to set a committee that would be under the Central Elections Committee, that they would advise him with security issues, because it's difficult for such a person who is a Supreme Justice to understand and to know what to do, and he has to rely on their recommendation and their data. But they should report him and not the other way.
There's also a more fundamental issue here, and going back to the issue of trust that underpins democracy, is that what can a democracy do to fight that without infringing on democratic values like privacy or freedom of speech? I mean, how do you balance the measures to curtail the cyber attacks with similar measures to promote and safeguard the right to privacy and the freedom of speech?
Well, I think this point is one of the most important things that we thought about it when we came to this research, because just to provide against cyber attacks, cyber security measures is not enough. You have to consider what is the price in terms of democracy, in terms of privacy, as you said, in terms of other things that are important for democratic societies. What do you pay for that? For example, if you want to see who is attacking the cyberspace in the social media, well, you don't want that the Shin Bet would look at that and see and censor it or whatever. So the thing, what to do exactly, on the one hand, to be not to be stupid and not to let other entities to interfere with your elections on the one hand, and on the other hand, not to ruin your democratic values. This is the challenge here, and this goes all the way in this research.
How do you do it?
First, we believe that the main role would be to this Central Committee of the elections. Why? Because, for example, as Ron said, when Mueller, after 2 years after the elections, going out with a report, this has nothing to do with the elections of 2016. So, for example, when you see that there is an attack, the question whether or not to tell the public, and in this way to respond to this kind of attack, because the public knows that what he hears it's not the real thing. It's something that goes from a foreign entity. So the question whether or not to tell the public and when to do that, this is something that goes to democracy. We all remember that Mr. Comey from the FBI did this a week before or a few days before the election in the US, and what were the results of it. So we don't want that the director of the Shin Bet or the director of the Cyber Directorate would be the one who decide whether or not to tell and what exactly to say. So we do want that this would be the role of the Supreme Justice, because he is more trained to balance between these values of security on the one hand and democracy on the other hand. And this is just one example.
Right. Ron, the issues that have been raised here are really universal. There are many, many countries around the world who are dealing with the same challenges, with the same risks. Is there any attempt to form some kind of, international trans-governmental body to address these issues?
One of our recommendation is actually to do just that. I'm not aware of any real mechanism that is working right now, but I'll give you one example why it is so important. For example, if someone is trying to intervene in your election system from outside, usually they'll hide themselves in the internet. So you'll have the problem of attribution. You want to attribute the attacker, but you can't do that. Usually he'll use many hopes on the internet, so you can't really identify him. He can go, if even, let's take, for example, Russia, it's not something that is directly connected to Russia, right? They can hope to many countries. So what you need is a collaboration with the countries to reveal who's behind the servers that actually in the game along all the value chain of the attacker, to really be able at the end of the day to attribute who was the originator of the attack. And to do so, you have to have some kind of cooperation between countries. And I think that Western democracies realize this, and I believe that we'll see such a mechanism soon.
Do you think that Israel, being the startup nation and all that jazz, can lead this kind of movement? I mean, does Israel have a certain know-how, a certain technology that other countries don't?
Yeah, I think that the answer is yes, because we see today many countries come here to Israel to learn about the Israeli cyber program. The Cyber Directorate, which is one of the results of this program, established 6 years ago, has all the time delegation from all over the world come here to Israel to learn how we do it in Israel. I believe that things that we recommended in our paper and other things that are being done here in Israel can be copied to democracies all over the world with adjustments to the system and the legal system in those countries. But there's a lot you can learn here in Israel. And I think that it's important that Israel will lead because of what you asked a minute ago about the collaboration that we want to achieve at the end of the day to make this attribution, to understand who's behind the attack.
And what happens when the intervention to undermine the trust or the democratic process or whatever doesn't come from the outside? I mean, we see the corruption of the political and democratic discourse at home, even without any kind of foreign intervention. I mean, disseminating fake news by Russian bots is one thing, but when an established political party disseminates fake news, and one example perhaps that comes to mind is that Arab voters are being bussed to the polls by left-wing NGOs. And we all know how effective it has been on the result of last time round. What do you do against that? It seems that all your efforts to set up this, ingenious legal scheme and technological mechanism are, just futile in face of that.
Yeah, this is a huge question. But to be honest, when we started our paper, we took the easy path. We thought that going into the inner system in Israel will be much harder, and to define the exact balance between your democratic rights and what you are doing or not doing on the internet, to balance that is much harder when you're talking about citizens of Israel. So this is the reason we took an easier problem, which is foreign intervention. But it's a wonderful idea for our next paper. So I believe we'll deal with that. I totally agree that the danger of people here in Israel manipulating the internet, the social media, using it in a way that we didn't plan when we planned our democracy is a huge threat to democracy. So we should look into it, but yet on the other hand, we don't want to have an internet police. We want to have freedom of speech, which all the social media is a wonderful way to be able to use your freedom of speech. So I think that this is much harder. And I'll tell you one more thing. We want our paper to be something that can be used by the government here in Israel. So I want it to be something that will be practical. The recommendation can be used by...
And implemented,
right. We wanted to move the needle, as we say. And I'm afraid that if we went there to the inner system, we would have a hard time getting to that. And I think today our recommendations are very practical.
Right. Okay, Eli Bahar and Ron Shamir, research fellows affiliated with the Israel Democracy Institute, specializing in the threats posed to the democratic process by cyber attacks and online intervention. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
And also many thanks to Gizem Ozdemir, our sound engineer, and to Itai Shelem and Georgia Foscarini, our producers. And of course, to the Israel Democracy Institute for their generous support. My co-host, Dale Shandlin, will be back with us shortly. And in the meantime, many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we would like to ask you this. Please consider writing us a review. You too can support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. We've got gifts and perks for you. Check out our archive. It has almost 500 interviews, actually more. If you like us, please like us on Facebook as well. Our page is called Tel Aviv Review Podcast, Ideas from Israel, and follow me and Dalia on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review, and until then, goodbye.